This is Athens Unpacked. I'm Sofka, and in a series of podcasts, I'm continuing my long quest to understand this fascinating city. Athens Unpacked is made for This is Athens, the official visitor's guide to the city. Much of life in Athens is lived outside. If there's a chance of drinking and eating in the fresh air, we take it, summer and winter. In the old days, before air conditioning, people would even sleep outside on their terraces when sultry nights made bedrooms unbearable. This episode unpacks some of the advantages of living in a city with a Mediterranean climate. Taking to the streets covers an absurdly broad spectrum. I'm including everything from theatrical performances and street dogs to protest marches and graffiti. We'll be hearing all sorts of different voices, including some controversial opinions, and this feels appropriate in the city where democracy first emerged. To get the long view, I rang up Bruce Clark. He's a brilliant writer and journalist from Northern Ireland, and he has a deep knowledge of Greece, its language and history. Athenians spend a lot of time outdoors for obvious reasons. Has it always been like this?
Yes, I'm very struck when I read the great ancient Greek texts by how much business was done out of doors and sometimes spontaneously. If you imagine the scene described in Plato's Symposium, and Socrates is on his way to a dinner party, and he runs into a friend, and he says, well, why don't you come along too? So he persuades his friend to gate crash the party, more or less, and that seems to be okay. I mean, that very much recalls things in present-day Athenian social life. Or indeed, I may say, I've witnessed scenes on the pavement outside the parliament in present-day Athens. Two MPs will run into each other, or maybe an MP and a newspaper editor, and they'll have a conversation, and something may come from that conversation.
You're writing a book now about Athens. Can you tell me its title and what it covers?
Yes, it's an ambitious book, I must say, and I'm discovering lots of things along the way. The title of the book is Athens, City of Wisdom, and it tries to trace the history of the city from the very earliest times, from Mycenaean times up to the present day, and just recalling all the extraordinary moments in human history which this landscape has been witness to.
Vanne, lasciami, né timor di me ti prenda, salvarlo potrò.
One of the most marvellous experiences in Greece is watching a performance in an ancient theatre. The Odeon of Herodes Atticus is right on the edge of the Acropolis, and catching a play or a concert there is unforgettable. Take a cushion in case the marble gets hard, or just ponder on the other spectators who experienced exactly the same feeling in that spot any time in the last couple of millennia. Here's an old recording of Maria Callas singing there in 1957. Perhaps my favourite summer evening destination is an open-air cinema. Watching a film under the stars is the perfect combination of relaxation, romance and excitement. Many have sweet-smelling plants like jasmine, and they create a sort of scented cinema bower. You get neighbours out on their balconies catching a movie for free. Cats appear by your feet. Most neighbourhoods offer outdoor screenings in the summer, but a few stand out, like there's the historical and high-class Egli, or Glory, by the National Garden. Or there's the Syntagma, where a spectacular view of the lit-up Acropolis is an added bonus. For open-air music, I'd recommend Technopolis in Gazi. The abandoned gasworks were transformed into a cultural centre about 20 years ago and now host a massive summer festival. Anna Gagga is the director. and I asked her what sort of audiences they attract.
A sold-out concert here in Technopolis is 6,000 people. And of course we have every year for the last 20 years, the Athens Technopolis Jazz Festival, which is the biggest jazz institution in Greece, actually, not only Athens. And we have 6,000 people every night for 7 days.
Every city sees marches and protests, but Athenians have a special aptitude. Many of the demonstrations involve Syntagma. Its very name, Constitution Square, comes from when Greeks demanded a constitution from their first king Otto in 1843. I'm going to meet the remarkable journalist Helena Smith. She's been the Guardian's correspondent here for decades. Helena, you've been covering Greece as a journalist for 30 years, and I'd really love to know what Syntagma Constitution Square means for you. I mean, I'm guessing you've probably caught a whiff of tear gas here from time to time.
I have indeed, but so have all journalists based here in Athens. First and foremost, I'd say that Syntagma is testimony to the ability of Greeks to protest and to Greeks to have fun and celebrate, perhaps in equal measure, although in recent years we've seen the ability of Greeks to take to the streets to press for their demands.
What are the things that stand out for you in recent times?
Well, the Greeks caught on early to the idea of people power. Some might say that the ability to protest is in their DNA. Protests have to a great degree defined the nation's modern history, and yes, Syntagma has been the focal point of mass rallies precisely because it is the central square of Greek political life.
Constitution Square's also been a place for celebrations. It's not just for protests and demonstrations.
Absolutely. I mean, most famously, George Papandreou in 1944, in October 1944, gave his very moving and masterful speech upon the liberation of Athens once the German Nazi occupation was ending, the German troops were moving out of the country.
What's interesting about the speech in October 1944 of liberation is that then not long after there was one of the great disastrous demonstrations that led to the so-called Dekembriana, the December events, where many people were killed in Syntagma Square just in front of the Grand Britannia and within sight of the British Army.
And you are in fact asking me a bombshell question, because these events are so disputed even now, and in a sense lay the groundwork for the strains and schisms that have defined modern Greek society ever since. This great dichotomy between left and right, and those torturous events went on, as you so rightly said, created the scene for the Dekembriana, the December events, which is now regarded as the beginning of the Greek Civil War, which, as you who have written a novel about it know so well, divided the nation, rather, between left and right for so many years.
Helena is referring to my book, The House on Paradise Street. I was fascinated by how the horrors of civil war can linger in the psyche, how even in recent times of crisis, old divisions re-emerge. My novel follows two Athenian sisters taking radically different paths in the Civil War, and the impact across the generations. Thinking about more recent times, we've also had big occupations and demonstrations in the centre of the square within the last years during the financial crisis.
Greece's great debt crisis, of course, in more modern times, was the lever for mass rallies and protest marches throughout Athens. At some point, it's said as many as 100,000 people came out onto the street. I mean, in order to be bailed out by the EU and the International Monetary Fund, a succession of governments, starting with the government of George Papandreou, the Socialist Prime Minister, in 2010, accepted to enforce straitjacket fiscal rules on Greek society, and that had an extraordinary effect on the livelihood and quality of life of Greeks, and in return prompted thousands of them to take to the streets on an almost daily basis. And it is here in Syntagma Square that so many of those protests eventually ended up.
Here's a clip from a BBC report in 2015.
They've taken to the streets again, surrounding Parliament in a show of popular force. The austerity measures will almost certainly be approved, but for many Greeks, that won't be the end of their defiance.
That it was voted on is one thing, its implementation is another. The people will tear it apart.
Even Athens' street dogs sometimes join the marches. A while back, during a period of frequent demonstrations, there were a couple of so-called riot dogs who often led the charge. Loukanikos, or Sausage, was one who became famous for his love of the action and his audacity before riot police. Not for nothing was the late Sausage called the Che Guevara of dogs. And he's now commemorated, amongst other things, as street art. You don't see as many feral and abandoned dogs as before, though they've long been considered canine citizens and lent a helping hand. Notice how they cross roads alongside pedestrians and meet for sociable lunches around the back of tavernas. The decrease in street dogs is due to an increased awareness of animal welfare. Many are now adopted, including our own Circe, Kirki in Greek. She's named after the enchantress who turned Odysseus's men into pigs. Over the last couple of decades, Athenians have taken to pet owning in a much bigger way. Pet supply shops are now big business. Cats, on the other hand, still roam free in huge numbers. They're fed in every neighbourhood by dedicated cat slaves, people who believe they're volunteers. There are also sterilising programmes. A clipped feline ear is the sign a female animal has been neutered and re-released. The most joyful march in Athens has to be Gay Pride. It's really taken off in recent years and now boasts up to 200,000 participants with a week of events. I'm going to see Foteini Pipi, the young head of volunteers. I wanted to ask her whether attitudes towards the LGBTQ community have changed.
We do have some progress, a lot of progress, if I can say. We have a lot of work to do, actually, but it seems that we are changing for the best. We do see more people accepting, sometimes even tolerating, but that's a start.
Where do you think the problems are that remain?
We are a conservative society, I would say.
Do you think Athens Pride is making a difference to those conservative attitudes?
Of course it does. It's actually the power of all these people coming down to and participating to Athens Pride is what makes the difference. It's not the festival itself. Without them, we would be nothing. But the power of that and the visibility that brings to the community is life-changing. Not only the changing on the society, but also for the participants as well.
That was Anna Gagga, One Swallow, one of Theodorakis' many songs dedicated to resistance and freedom. More on the composer in the next episode. The words are by the Nobel laureate Odysseus Elitis. And we're now going across town to Athens' Polytechnic.
Εδώ Πολυτεχνείο. Τα γνήλα, ο ραδιοφωνικός σταθμός των ελεύθερων αγωνιζόμενων φοιτητών, των ελεύθερων αγωνιζόμενων Ελλήνων.
Εδώ Polytechnio, Polytechnic here. That was a famous clip from the students' radio station. One of the iconic demonstrations of the last century was the 1973 student uprising in the Athens Polytechnic. To discuss this, I'm going to meet Stavros Martinos. He's an architect who studied there. We're outside the Polytechnic, and it seems to me you can't really understand the last 50 years of Athenian politics without knowing something about this place. Can you unpack it for me?
Sure, well, that's correct. It's not just politics, it's culture and everyday life. This is a university campus, right? It's the formal name National Technical University of Athens. It's a research university, much coveted, but it's also a cultural icon in Greece during the last at least 50 years. It always has been, but it got a new significance after a major student uprising in 1973. And, well, the official version of recent history says that this triggered the fall of the military junta.
And the junta, could you just remind me, so they took over with a military coup in 1967?
Yes, and they lasted for 7 years. Even now in Greece, this is referred to as the Eptaitia, the 7 years.
Every year on November the 17th, there's a big gathering at the Polytechnic. It's quite dramatic. I've been once or twice to observe it. And then there's a march all the way through the centre of Athens to the US Embassy. This is quite an event. Can you tell me what's going on?
Actually, the march is the culmination of a 3-day institutional celebration that takes place every year. And the US were involved in the making of the dictatorship, like the US government was responsible for many military coups in Latin America, for example. But it points to the American embassy. It starts from here, the place of insurrection or revolution, and goes to those responsible or perceived as the responsible ones. Because okay, we may not like to know about this, but the Greek military junta was a Greek military junta, not exclusively American.
We've walked up the road from the Polytechnic right into the centre of Exarchia. This is a very particular neighbourhood. It has a reputation. There's graffiti all over the place, lots of students. There's a legend. Can you unpack that for us?
It is indeed one of those inner city areas that do carry their legend. It's a very political neighborhood. But beyond the surface, it's basically what used to be the student neighborhood. This was the meeting point, and this does not just attract young people who may want to stay here or go out here. It attracts publishing houses, it attracts community centers, it attracts political party headquarters.
Exarchia is associated with counterculture, with burning streets. The kind of images we see on television can sometimes be quite alarming. There are people who don't want to come into this area. Would you say that there's any truth in that?
Of course, there's a grain of truth, but it's mediated. For example, this can turn violent. But counterculture is not just about violence or being political. Counterculture is about reinventing oneself, reinventing what you already know. And this is one of the places in this city to do this.
Just to add here, an event in Exarchia that really shocked me and all Athenians occurred in 2008. Police shot and killed a 15-year-old schoolboy, Alexandros Grigoropoulos. He was around the same age as my daughters, which really brought it home. Massive riots ensued, and there's a street memorial honouring him in the place where he died.
If you're looking for the source of all this violence, you know the Greek movie Dogtooth, right? This whimsical, weird, uncanny representation of the almighty Greek family as the source of violence blanketed under protection, where words change their meaning, things like that. So when you come to reinvent yourself and escape this kind of protection, where do you come to? You come here.
Dogtooth, that Stavros refers to, is a remarkable and disturbing 2009 film. It's by the Athenian director Yorgos Lanthimos. More recently, Lanthimos has directed some amazing Oscar and BAFTA-winning films in English, including The Lobster and The Favourite. Wherever you look in Exarchia, there's graffiti. There's street art and the slogans, but much consists of tags where people spray their name or mark. Most people I know can't see the point of this sort of marking. Certainly a huge effort is being made by the authorities to clean up the place. But hate it or love it, graffiti is a fact of life in Athens. This is a Greek rap song by a group called Syntagma. It's called Tonight We're Painting.
Graffiti on the wall.
Αθήνα, στέκομαι μπροστά σου. Επικαλούμε κι απόψε την ομορφιά σου. Θα μιλήσω για τα πιο σκληρά παιδιά σου. Αθήνα είναι εδώ, κάπου εδώ. Τα λάνια σου είναι εδώ, κάπου μεταξύ.
Hoping to understand why people want to spray their names or tags, I asked my daughter if she'd talk with a friend of hers who's a practitioner. He wanted to remain anonymous. Lara started off asking, what is a tag?
So a tag is basically your name. It's a nickname for you. You either made it yourself, you either had people calling you that when you were young and it stuck. That was the case for me. I've kind of been developing my skills in doing like characters, like a little face next to my graffiti piece or like a couple hands holding my graffiti piece. Pretty simple stuff that it's not too hard to figure out how to do after been painting for 10 years. Basically big lettering with your tag name, different colors, crazy backgrounds, nice highlights, and anything else you can think of that could make it look pretty cool. Sometimes I also like to add a little comment on the side. If I have something in my life that happened, or if there's been some political turmoil, for example. Like, I like seeing tags, even though a lot of people don't like tags, because it just reminds me how lively of a place we live in. Like, how easy it is for someone to, at night, just get up and go down the street, wait for the right time, scope out a spot, and just start painting, you know?
Just to butt in, I was glad to learn that this graffitist avoids painting on marble or stone walls. He sees vans and trucks as fair game, but says he doesn't touch cars or private houses. Lara asked him what it feels like.
So the atmosphere before painting is one of my favorite parts, actually. So typically, I have one or two friends with me. Usually, one of my friends paints with me, and then the third person is there just to hang out and check for any danger or cops, or basically be a lookout. The most important thing is basically to know how to get out of there. How many times of the times I was caught have I been arrested?
How many times have you been caught?
Been caught like, I don't know, 20 times total. 20, 25 times total. For graffiti, I've done like 2 court cases for graffiti. Yeah, I've painted way more times than that. So, yeah.
My thought at the end of this interview was that there's a bit of an overlap between the way dogs mark lampposts in the street and the graffiti tagger. Each is leaving a sign he was there. If all this action and street life feels too much, there are plenty of escape routes. One of my favourites, and only a short drive from the centre, is the area around Exarchia Monastery. You go up through the old refugee neighbourhood of Exarchia. Then you keep going, and suddenly you've left the city behind. It's all pine woods and flowery meadows, and you're on the slopes of Mount Hymettus. There's the odd cafe, an excellent plant nursery selling native species, bubbling spring waters, and best of all, the exquisite Byzantine monastery of St. John. It was built in the 11th century, and as so often with Christian sites, it was placed on top of something ancient, pagan, and sacred. In this case, a temple to Aphrodite. If you want to know more about this habit and the evolution of the goddess of love, read Bettany Hughes's excellent Aphrodite and Venus. From here at the monastery, you can set off through the woods, part of a fantastic reforestation programme. It's land where the monks grew olives and kept bees, and a perfect place for picnics or hiking. From this peaceful, perfumed spot, you gaze down on the capital with a different perspective. Whether you like rap or jazz, opera or bouzouki, Athens provides music for every preference. And this is the subject of our next episode. We'll unpack the history of the alternative culture behind rembetika, or the Greek blues. We'll take a look at folk songs, or δημοτικά, and we'll visit a celebrated singer who has worked with some of the greatest composers of the last century. I am Sofka Zinoviev, and you just listened to Athens Unpacked for This is Athens, the official visitor's guide to the city of Athens, online at thisisathens.org. You can find all episodes of Athens Unpacked on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of your favourite podcast apps. Athens Unpacked is a production of pod.gr. Thanks to Katerina Bakoyani for her endless support. Producer, Michalis Kamakas. Sound engineer, Chrisa Kurenda. Director of Productions, Elena Dimitraiki. Assistant producer, Lara Papadimitriou. Original theme music by Anna Papadimitriou. This podcast is funded by Greece and the European Union.
Pod.gr. Sounds good.